The laughter stopped the moment the billionaire woman walked into the room and saw the little girl sleeping in the arms of the man they had chosen to embarrass her with. For years, everyone had called Victoria Sterling ruthless. She was the woman who could destroy a company with one signature, fire executives without blinking, and walk away from a relationship the instant she sensed weakness. So when her wealthy friends decided to play a cruel little joke at their most extravagant charity gala, they thought pairing her with a struggling single father would be the funniest moment of the evening. They were wrong. Because that night, behind the cold expression of the most feared woman in the city, something she had buried for years began to break open. And the man they thought was beneath her would become the one person who reminded her what it meant to have a heart. If you believe kindness can change a life, that people deserve second chances, and that sometimes the person we least expect can teach us the greatest lesson, please like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. Because sometimes a joke becomes a turning point, and sometimes the person everyone laughs at is the one who walks away with the greatest victory. Victoria Sterling arrived at the gala in a black designer gown, surrounded by cameras and powerful businessmen who smiled at her face and whispered about her behind her back. She owned hotels, technology companies, luxury apartments, and half a dozen businesses people only knew by name. She had spent 20 years building an empire after growing up with nothing, and somewhere along the way she had convinced herself that emotions were liabilities. Across the ballroom, however, stood Daniel Carter, a quiet single father in an inexpensive suit that had clearly been worn too many times. He worked as a mechanic during the day and delivered food at night, doing everything he could to keep his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, safe and happy after losing his wife 3 years earlier. Daniel had been invited because the charity was supposed to help struggling families, but he had no idea he was about to become the evening's entertainment. The joke began when one of Victoria's wealthy friends announced that, since Victoria claimed she was impossible to impress, they had found the perfect man for her. Laughter spread through the room as Daniel was encouraged to join Victoria at the main table. Someone whispered that perhaps the billionaire needed to experience real life for one evening. Another joked that the mechanic might become her next charity project. Daniel heard every word, but instead of arguing, he simply lowered his eyes. He had learned long ago that pride did not put food on a table. Victoria initially looked furious, not because Daniel was poor, but because she realized everyone was treating another human being like a prop. She was about to leave when she noticed Lily standing near the entrance, wearing a simple blue dress and clutching a tiny stuffed rabbit. Victoria expected Daniel to be embarrassed. Instead, he quietly excused himself from the table and walked over to his daughter. Lily had become overwhelmed by the crowd, and Daniel knelt beside her, fixed the ribbon in her hair, and told her that they could leave whenever she wanted. There was no anger in his face, no attempt to impress anyone, and no shame about his circumstances. Victoria watched as he gave Lily the last piece of chocolate from his pocket, pretending he was not hungry himself. Something about that small gesture unsettled her. She had attended thousands of dinners where people spent more on flowers than Daniel probably earned in a month, yet she had rarely seen anyone offer something so freely. Later that night, Victoria found Daniel outside on the balcony. He was sitting alone, looking over the city lights while Lily slept against his shoulder. Victoria expected him to complain about the humiliation, but Daniel simply admitted that he had been embarrassed for a moment before remembering that his daughter was watching him. He said he could survive people laughing at his clothes, his job, or his bank account, but he never wanted Lily to learn that being poor meant being less worthy. Those words struck Victoria harder than any insult ever had. She remembered being 19 years old, sitting outside a hospital room after her father died, hearing relatives argue about money while she wondered who would pay the medical bills. She remembered promising herself that she would never again depend on anyone. Wealth had become her armor. Somewhere along the way, however, the armor had become a prison. The following morning, Victoria surprised everyone by visiting Daniel's small garage. She expected to find a broken-down place, but instead she found Daniel working beneath an old car while Lily sat nearby doing her homework. The garage was modest, yet spotless. Daniel had built a little corner for Lily with a second-hand desk, a lamp, and a shelf of books. Victoria asked why he had never asked the charity for help. Daniel explained that he had applied several times but had been rejected because he did not have the right connections. Victoria could have written a check and solved everything in seconds, but for the first time in her life, she stopped herself. Instead, she asked him what he actually needed. Daniel looked at her and said he needed an opportunity, not pity. That sentence changed everything. Victoria offered Daniel a contract to maintain the vehicles for one of her companies, with fair pay and benefits. She also helped the charity create a program for single parents who needed work rather than handouts. But the greatest change was happening inside Victoria. She began visiting the garage without cameras, without assistants, and without telling anyone. Lily started calling her Miss V, and slowly, the woman who had once been uncomfortable around children found herself laughing at bedtime stories and eating takeout at a tiny kitchen table. Daniel never treated Victoria like a billionaire. He treated her like a person. When she was wrong, he told her. When she was afraid, he noticed. And when she tried to hide behind her wealth, he reminded her that being strong did not mean being alone. Months later, the same people who had laughed at Daniel watched in stunned silence as Victoria stood beside him at another charity gala. This time, there was no joke. Victoria publicly announced the opening of a foundation dedicated to helping single parents find stable employment, affordable housing, and education for their children. Daniel stood beside her, holding Lily's hand. The room applauded, but Victoria barely noticed. She was looking at Daniel, and he was looking back at her with the quiet smile that had first caught her attention months earlier. The cruel joke had been meant to prove that Victoria Sterling could never belong beside someone like Daniel Carter. Instead, it had shown her that love, compassion, and dignity had nothing to do with money. Daniel had not rescued Victoria from poverty. He had rescued her from something much deeper, the loneliness she had mistaken for strength. And Victoria had not rescued Daniel with her fortune. She had simply opened a door and given him the opportunity he had always deserved. Together, they learned that sometimes two broken people do not need to fix each other. Sometimes they simply need someone willing to see the person underneath the scars. Before the ending, tell me in the comments, do you believe one act of kindness can completely change someone's life? Write, yes, if you believe everyone deserves a second chance. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach someone who may need a little hope today. And remember, never judge a person by their clothes, their bank account, or the life they appear to have. The richest heart in the room may belong to the person everyone else has decided is worth nothing. Sometimes, the cruelest joke becomes the most beautiful beginning, and sometimes, the person they paired with you as a joke becomes the person who teaches you how to live again.